The sun hung over Calico Ridge like it didn't care, beating down on a crowd too eager to forget their own sins. Dust clung to boots, and even the flies seemed ashamed of what was happening behind the sheriff's office, where a girl no older than 16 stood on a crate with a rope around her wrists and a sign nailed to the post, "Property of Debt." Her mother was nowhere in sight, hauled off to jail or worse. Men with coin in hand watched the auctioneer bark numbers like he was selling horses. But when the final bid landed, higher than anyone expected, it came from a man in a weathered coat who stood apart from the crowd. He didn't smile. He didn't even step forward to claim her. And when they asked if he was taking her home, he said, calm as dust, "No." That's when the whole town turned. That's when the real story began. The town of Calico Ridge wasn't a place where mercy came easy. The wind that blew down its single, cracked main street was dry as bone, and it carried more whispers than prayers. It was the kind of town where people stopped looking out for each other once it became easier to look away. That afternoon, the town square held more dust than dignity. A makeshift platform had been nailed together behind the sheriff's office, just wide enough for one person to stand on. From a distance, it looked like a gallows without the rope. But what was happening here might have been worse. The girl on the platform couldn't have been more than 16. She wore a dress 2 sizes too big and shoes with broken laces. Her name, Lena Holloway, was pinned to the front of her collar on a torn scrap of paper. Her wrists were tied loosely in front, more for show than restraint. She wasn't going anywhere, not because of the rope, but because there was nowhere left to go. Her mother, once a respected seamstress in Calico Ridge, had vanished 3 nights prior, dragged away by deputies after losing every cent they didn't have on cards and rot-gut whiskey. What the woman owed, she couldn't pay, and what she left behind, this girl, was now being sold off like unclaimed freight. The man running the auction, Jed Merton, was a wiry creature with a laugh like a nail dragged across a coffin lid. He stood beside Lena, tapping a ledger with a chewed-up pencil and waving his hat in the air like a carnival barker. "Debt stands at $75, folks," he announced, eyes scanning the small crowd. "Girl's healthy, quiet, strong for her size. We'll start at 20. Any takers?" The sheriff leaned against a post nearby, arms crossed, not saying a word. Neither was Lena. She stood barefoot, shoulders drawn up, chin tilted ever so slightly. She didn't flinch when a man in a greasy vest shouted, "I'll give 15," and the crowd laughed. Another voice called out 20, then 25. "Do I hear 30? Jed grinned, eyes alight with the kind of joy that only comes from watching someone sink lower than you. Lena didn't speak, but her eyes swept across the faces, smiling, sneering, smirking, like she was memorizing each one to forget later. 35, another voice called. Then came a silence, sudden and sharp. A voice at the edge of the crowd, low, rough, and calm as cold iron, said, 75. Heads turned. At the back of the crowd, standing under the shade of a broken signpost, was a man in a long coat and trail-worn boots. Ezra Boone. He didn't look like much. A rancher maybe. 40, maybe older. Dust in his beard, shadows under his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't approach. Jed blinked. "That covers the whole debt." "Exactly," Ezra said. "All right then, Mr. Boone," Jed said, clapping his hands. "Come claim your girl." But Ezra didn't move. He shook his head once and said plainly, "I'm not taking her." The crowd turned tense. A few chuckled, confused. Jed's grin faltered. "You're what now?" "I said I'm not taking her," Ezra repeated. "I just didn't want anyone else to." And with that, he turned and started walking away, boots stirring dust as he went. Behind him, the crowd murmured. The sheriff finally pushed off the post and walked toward the platform. Jed sputtered. "What the hell are we supposed to do with her now?" No one had an answer. Not even Lena, who stood very still, watching the man disappear into the heat haze. Not sure if she'd just been rescued or left behind again. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square. But no one dared move Lena from the platform. Jed Merton had stomped off, muttering curses, and the sheriff, Rafe Dunning, a man whose badge meant less than his bar tab, just scratched his chin and sighed like this was someone else's problem. By dusk, Lena was still standing there, arms sore, lips dry. The crowd had thinned. No one claimed her, but no one helped her down either. Finally, Sheriff Dunning barked at his deputy to lock the girl up somewhere till we figure out what to do with her. Lena was led down off the crate like a piece of broken equipment and shoved into the old supply cell behind the saloon. No windows, just a cot, a dirt floor, and the smell of mildew and forgotten men. She didn't cry, not once. She just sat, hands clasped in her lap, staring at the cracked boards in the wall like they might tell her what was supposed to come next. It was hours later, long past dark, when someone knocked softly on the door. Then a key turned, and in stepped Miss Greta, the apothecary woman from the corner shop. She was tall, all gray bun and stiff skirts, with eyes like someone who had once cared too much and learned to do it quieter now. She didn't speak right away. She set down a folded blanket in a small tin plate with 2 biscuits and a strip of dried meat. "I remember your mother," she said at last. "She used to sing while she worked. Had a voice like river water. That was before the debts, before the drink." Lena said nothing, just nodded once and took the food with both hands like it might vanish. Greta lingered a moment, as if about to say more, then turned and left without closing the door all the way. A while later, heavy boots scraped the ground outside. Lena tensed. The door creaked again. Ezra Boone stepped just into the light, not enough to cross the threshold. He didn't speak at first, and neither did she. I knew her," he said eventually. "A long time ago." Lena blinked slowly. "Why did you bid?" Ezra's eyes didn't waver. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of who else might win." He didn't step inside. He didn't offer promises. Just that one answer. And then he was gone, leaving the door open behind him. Morning came hard and colorless. Lena hadn't slept much. She'd folded the blanket Greta gave her into a pillow and kept her boots on, back against the corner wall like she was waiting for something to break in. By sunrise, the townsfolk were stirring again, some out of guilt, most out of habit. Word had spread fast about the auction's ending. Ezra Boone had paid the full debt, then walked away. That kind of move didn't fit the town's logic. Calico Ridge didn't believe in mercy without price. The sheriff showed up late, a coffee in hand and a fresh stain down his vest. "Girl still here?" he muttered to his deputy, peeking into the cell like Lena might have vanished. That's when the mayor's assistant arrived, all polished boots and self-importance. He carried papers, rules, proposals. "We've decided," he announced loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "she'll be indentured to the blacksmith until the debt is worked off. 10 years, maybe more. Legal and fair." Lena didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, chin high, lips set tight. She didn't speak, but the glare she gave the man could have cut rope. Then from the far side of the yard, Ezra Boone spoke. "I've got another idea." The men turned. Ezra walked forward slow, hat in hand. "She comes with me. I've got room. Work if she wants it. She stays as long as she wants." The assistant blinked, stuttering. "You already bid, then refused to—" "I didn't claim her," Ezra said calmly. "Didn't mean I was walking away. Just didn't want her treated like freight." "You want legal? You've got your $75. That clears her record. Now she's free, which means she gets to choose." The sheriff scratched his chin again, clearly irritated that this had become his problem. "Well, I suppose he's right." All eyes turned to Lena. She looked at Ezra, then at the men behind him, then at the street. She had no reason to trust anyone, but something about Ezra's offer sat differently. It wasn't charity. It wasn't ownership. He wasn't reaching for her. He wasn't begging her to come. He was just waiting. "I'll go," she said finally, "but only if I can leave whenever I want." Ezra nodded once. "That's the deal." And just like that, the rules of Calico Ridge cracked, just a little, as Lena Holloway stepped out of the cell and followed a stranger into the sun. Ezra didn't speak much on the ride back. Lena didn't either. The horse he brought for her was old but sure-footed, and the trail wound wide around the hills like it had all the time in the world. By the time they reached his place, the sun had already dropped behind the ridge, casting the land in that strange hush that only comes at the end of a day worth surviving. Ezra's ranch sat low in the valley, tucked between dry pasture and a shallow creek bed. The fence was patched with mismatched wood, the porch sagged in the middle, and the barn door hung slightly off its hinge. It wasn't much, but it looked lived in, not abandoned. A home someone had stayed in on purpose. Two men stepped out from the barn as they arrived. Silas, thick-shouldered and gray around the temples, and Grady, lean with a permanent squint. Both of them gave Lena a cautious glance, then looked to Ezra, waiting for instruction. He just said, "She's staying a while. That's all there is to it." They nodded and went back to work. Lena was shown to a small room in the main house. Bare walls, clean floor, a bed with a real mattress, and a folded quilt at the foot. Ezra didn't linger. He set her bag down and stepped back. "There's water on the stove. You're free to rest or work or walk. I don't ask anything of you." She didn't respond right away. Then, "Why are you doing this?" Ezra looked at her, tired, steady. "Because no one else did." And he left her there, not like a prisoner, not like a guest, just left her, like she belonged without needing to prove it. The days that followed passed quiet and slow. Lena swept the porch, fed the chickens, helped Grady move hay. She wasn't asked to, she just couldn't stand doing nothing. The men stayed out of her way. No one commented when she fixed the broken gate latch. No one touched her, no one hovered. At night, she stayed up listening to Ezra play harmonica on the porch. It was always the same tune, low and slow, like a memory trying to surface. One morning, she wandered into the barn and found a large cedar chest locked with a brass latch. She didn't try to open it, but she stared at it for a long time. By the end of the week, Lena still hadn't decided what this place was. A stopover, a hiding place, or something more. But she'd stopped sleeping with her boots on. And that was something. It was nearly a week after Lena arrived at the ranch when trouble found its way back up the trail. The day had started like most others. Quiet. Grady was splitting kindling behind the barn, Silas was oiling the hinges on the chicken coop, and Lena was in the small garden pulling weeds with her sleeves rolled up. Ezra had ridden out early, checking fence lines. Just before noon, the dogs started barking. From the ridge came the thudding of hooves. A rider crested the hill, then another behind him. Dust trailed them like suspicion. The first man to dismount was Jed Merton. His grin was the same, crooked and smug, but his eyes darted like someone trying to act braver than he felt. "Boone," he called as he stepped down, "we've got unfinished business." Ezra met him at the fence line, calm as ever. Lena watched from the porch, eyes narrowing. Jed held up a folded paper. "Turns out your bid didn't include a formal claim. That means the girl's still unassigned. One of the ranchers in town, Carver Bell, filed for ownership this morning. Paperwork's all tidy now." Ezra didn't even look at the document. "You sold a girl like a mule, Jed. You think a few lines of ink change what's right?" Jed chuckled. "Ain't about right. It's about law. And by law, she belongs to Carver now. She'll be collected by end of day." There was a moment of silence. Ezra didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for the rifle, leaning near the door. He just said, "This land doesn't do collections?" Behind him, Silas and Grady had stopped working. Lena didn't move, but her jaw clenched. Jed shifted his weight, uneasy now. "You're making this difficult, Boone." "No," Ezra replied. "I'm making it clear." Jed stared at him a second longer, then spat in the dirt and turned back to his horse. "You always were good at standing in the way of things." As the men rode off, Ezra stayed by the fence, eyes fixed on the ridge until the dust settled. That night, Lena sat across from him at the supper table and asked, "You knew my mother, didn't you?" Ezra nodded once. "Before she left town, before it all changed." Lena didn't ask for more. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. like a hinge finally catching in place. The storm came in fast, angry and loud, one of those spring tempests that seems to rise from the ground itself. The clouds rolled black over the hills, thunder cracking sharp enough to shake window panes. Ezra was already out when it hit, trying to secure a downed fence post before the wind ripped it loose for good. Lena watched from the porch as the sky turned purple behind him, the rain starting in fat, slapping drops. When he didn't come back, something in her stirred. She grabbed Ezra's old slicker from the peg, threw it over her shoulders, and saddled one of the horses without asking permission. She'd never ridden through weather like that, but her hands moved like they knew what mattered. She found him near the west pasture, soaked and cursing under his breath, a coil of rope in one hand and a broken rail in the other. He looked up, surprised to see her. "You shouldn't be out in this," he shouted over the wind. "You shouldn't be alone," she shouted back. Between them, the storm howled, but for 1 second their eyes met, and Ezra said nothing. They rode back together, horses half blinded by rain, boots slipping in the mud. By the time they reached the barn, the worst of it had passed, but they were both shaking with cold and something else neither could name. Inside, while Ezra tended to the horses, Lena went to the far wall, the place she'd avoided for days, and knelt beside the old cedar chest. She didn't ask permission. She just lifted the latch and opened the lid. Inside were small bundles tied with ribbon, letters, newspaper clippings, a baby dress yellowed with age, a faded photograph of a woman who looked too much like her to be anyone else. Ezra found her sitting there, legs crossed, the dress in her lap. "You lied," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "She was here. You knew her. You loved her." His voice cracked a little when he replied, "I did. She left before I could give her anything worth staying for. Years later, she came back with nothing. And I still said nothing." Lena stared at him, that calm, sharp stare of hers. "So what am I to you? A second chance?" "No," Ezra said. "You're yourself. I just didn't want to fail twice." They sat in silence for a long time, the rain still dripping steady from the eaves. "I should have known sooner," Lena whispered. "Maybe," he replied, "but you know now." That night she didn't lock her door, and he didn't play the harmonica. They just let the house be quiet, and that was enough. 3 days passed after the storm, calm and strange. The air smelled cleaner, like something had been washed out of the land and maybe out of them too. Lena moved differently now, less like someone who might run, more like someone who was deciding whether she wanted to stay. She still rose early, swept the porch, fed the hens, but there was something behind her eyes, something measured. She'd found the pieces, but she hadn't told anyone if she meant to keep them. Then a rider came from town. He was young, wearing the mayor's seal on his chest and nervous sweat on his collar. He carried a letter, folded and stamped. Ezra read it on the porch while Lena waited, arms crossed. "They're calling you in," he said. "Says your status is unresolved. You're to report to town council by Friday." "To be reassigned?" she asked flatly. He hesitated. "That's what it sounds like. And if I don't go?" Ezra folded the letter carefully. "They'll come here." She stared at him, searching his face for anger, fear, guilt. But there was only weariness. "I won't stop you," he said. "If you go, I won't follow. If you stay, I won't chain you." That night, Lena packed her things into a flour sack, the same dress she arrived in, her mother's photo, a worn comb. She set it by the door before dinner, said nothing about it. Ezra didn't ask. Silas and Grady spoke quietly over their stew. Ezra barely touched his plate. After supper, Lena stepped outside alone. The stars were out in full, quiet and cold, blinking like they'd seen all this before. She sat on the porch, sack at her feet, hands in her lap. When Ezra joined her, she said without looking, "You're a strange man. I've been called worse. You bought my freedom, then told me to do what I want, because I meant it." She looked over at him. Most people want something in return. I do, he said. I want you safe. That's it. The silence held for a while. Then she stood, walked back inside, and picked up the sack. She carried it to her room and set it back down by the wall. The next morning, she was still there. When Ezra stepped into the kitchen, she was already boiling water for coffee. I'll work the north field today, she said, if you'll show me how. Ezra nodded. All right. And tomorrow, she added, maybe I'll try the fence line. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and passed her one. No promises were made, but something had been chosen. The weeks that followed didn't announce themselves with fanfare. No grand declarations, no final lines in the dirt. Just days, one after another, settling like dust on boots too worn to shine but strong enough to carry weight. Lena stayed. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. She mended her own clothes, learned to ride bareback, and stopped flinching at sudden sounds. Grady showed her how to fix a broken wheel hub. Silas taught her the name of every weed worth pulling. Ezra taught her nothing unless she asked, and when she did, he answered simply. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't a guest. She just was. One morning, she rode into town alone. The sheriff spotted her tying her horse outside the dry goods store. He tipped his hat, as if surprised to see her upright and unescorted. She nodded back, expression unreadable. No one tried to stop her. No one asked questions. By the time she rode out again, she carried a satchel of supplies and a new pair of boots she hadn't asked Ezra to pay for. Back at the ranch, she helped Ezra mend the north fence, the same one he'd been fixing during the storm. They worked in silence, side by side, the posts settling into the earth like roots. At one point, she stopped, leaned on the shovel, and asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" Ezra looked over the land, slow, used to, thought there was more somewhere else. And now? Now I think if you stand still long enough, the good might come to you. She smirked. You talk like a man who's spent too much time alone. Maybe I have. They finished the fence by sundown. The rails were crooked but sturdy, honest, like everything Ezra owned. That night, Lena brought out her mother's photograph. She set it on the mantel beside Ezra's old harmonica and a smooth stone Grady had carved into a bird. She didn't say anything, just placed it there and sat by the fire. Ezra sat too, stretching out his legs. You don't owe me anything, he said. I know. But I'm glad you're here. She didn't respond, just looked into the flames, eyes soft for the first time in months. The wind picked up outside, rustling dry grass and stirring the porch swing into a gentle creak. It no longer sounded like loneliness. It sounded like home.